Warning: this podcast may contain graphic and triggering content. Please listen at your own risk. Each individual struggle is different, and everyone's recovery and healing journey is different. Please reach out to a certified medical professional if you need help. Welcome to episode 47 of Stomp the Stigma, the podcast aimed to fight the stigma surrounding mental health through education, awareness, experiences, stories, resources, and the vulnerable truth. Joining me to Stomp the Stigma this week is Kim Toller. Last week, I interviewed her sister Joanne all about the trauma and healing journey that Joanne went on after losing her daughter. So this week, I have Kim on to talk about her healing journey and her trauma following losing her niece. These two are from the same family, experienced the same event, but their trauma was very different, and their mental health journeys were very different, and their healing process was also very different. So if you didn't hear episode 46, you can go back and listen to that. And then you can come and listen to this episode and hear the differences in their struggles. In this week's episode, I get to talk to Kim about her anxiety, how she used her therapy and coping mechanisms for years, so she kind of had the tools already in place when she experienced Taylor's death. But we got to get into how her anxiety changed after losing her niece, from focusing on the small things to the larger things in life. We got into a little bit of the stigma around how you think you should react to death and what other people expect from you versus what actually happened to her and what she went through, and trying to distinguish her fascination with crime and murder and death versus grieving the loss of her niece. As you guys know, this podcast is aimed at the mental health journey and the mental health side of things. But if you want to hear more about the case itself and the investigation and the events that led up to Taylor's death, you can check out Kim's podcast called A Million Other Choices, and the whole story is on there. So I hope you guys love this episode as much as I did. I love the comparison between the two sisters and really showcasing that the healing journey and trauma and everybody's mental health is different, even if you experience similar events. How are you?
I'm good. It's nice to meet you in person.
Yeah, nice to meet you too. My podcast is more focused on the mental health side of things, and so I want to get into kind of your struggles and your healing and everything that you've gone through since Taylor passed. Yeah, and just kind of how you have coped with everything and gotten through it and
Okay,
all of that.
sounds good.
Because I know that your experience is very different from your sister's. So
yes, we probably had. It's almost like we had completely different childhoods, and I don't know why that is, because we both grew up in the same house. But I guess it was underlying personalities, because so she went one way for coping. Like we all have to come up with coping mechanisms for just life in general. And hers took sort of a turn of a more chemical variety, and mine was much more anxiety and those kinds of things that that sort of manifested themselves in childhood, and so those are the kind of things that I've had to cope with.
Wow.
Stuff. So
okay.
Very different experiences.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Okay, to start off, I really want to thank you for joining me. Like I just said, I'm really excited to talk to you about your journey and your kind of healing perspective, because you have a very different perspective on mental health and that whole battle. As you know, I spoke to your sister last week, and I know that you've experienced trauma and healing very differently. So thank you for coming on and being open to sharing your story.
You're welcome, and thank you for having me. This is kind of exciting.
Yeah, I'm excited. Have you ever been on the other side of a podcast?
I have, but not. We always talk about murder, right? So
Right.
it's a little bit different to talk about the mental health side of it. So
Yeah.
that's kind of exciting to me because, of course, mental health is a big mental health, substance abuse, and a lot of those things all kind of feed into violent crime.
Mhm.
And because, of course, it's kind of a recurring theme sometimes that comes up both in the victims and in the perpetrators. So I think it's an important topic to talk about and to
Yeah.
talk about very openly.
Yeah. Oh, I
Yeah.
absolutely agree. Yeah.
Hmm.
So to give everyone listening a little bit of background, I guess if they didn't hear last week's episode, your niece
Hmm.
Taylor Toller was murdered a little over 3 years ago.
Yeah, July of 2018.
Yeah, by her boyfriend while he was in a drug-induced psychosis. So I guess can you touch on kind of the days and months that followed that for you? Like, how did you react to that? Or how did you even find out that it had happened in the first place?
Well, my mom had phoned me a couple of days before they found Taylor and asked if I had seen or heard from her because she sometimes would go. I don't want to say missing because she wasn't always a missing person, but she just sometimes wasn't in touch with the family for sometimes months at a time when she was with Dustin because we did
Yeah.
not approve of that relationship and we're really trying to get her to maybe rethink her life choices in that regard. So she had phoned me and said, have I seen or heard from her? And I said no. And she told me a little bit about how they had come back from Regina and Dustin had said that he had been diagnosed with schizophrenia. And she just said she was worried, and I said, "Well, you've been watching too much TV because, like, I'm sure everything's fine. She's just with Dustin. She just doesn't want you to know about it." And then I think it was 2 days after that, she phoned me again to say that she'd put in a missing persons report on her because she was really quite worried. And to tell you the truth, I kind of thought that she was being a bit ridiculous, and I didn't think the police were going to take it seriously. And
Yeah.
I don't whether they did or not. I don't. They went and knocked on her door. I don't know if that's taking it seriously or not. And then it was the next day, around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. My mom, she texted me and said that they had found Taylor and that she was deceased. And so, of course, I phoned her back, and I don't think I was really comprehending what I was reading.
Yeah.
Like, I think it was just kind of like, oh, they found Taylor, she's deceased. I don't even know what that means. So I phoned her, and she said, well, they found her, and they have Dustin in custody. And I just thought, well, like, what would Dustin have to do with a 24-year-old being dead? And then it just kind of slowly dawned on me that he killed her. And I mean, as much true crime and stuff that I have listened to and watched over the years, you just never think that that's going to happen. And I think it was probably 2 days of just in a mode of, okay, what's next? What do we have to do next? We have to, I had to phone my dad. He gets on the next plane. You just kind of go into that mode of, like, I don't know, you're just kind of putting one foot in front of the other,
Yeah.
doing what needs to be done. You're not processing anything. And it really wasn't until, well, Joanne had phoned me to say that she found a bag of Taylor's clothes, and they were going to put her in an old pair of her, like, pajama bottoms and a hoodie. And of course that makes me picture Taylor how she was, just, how a 24-year-old around the house,
Yeah.
her hair in a big bun on top of her head and these big hoodie and jammy bottoms. And I just, like, that was, I don't know, I guess it just kind of made it real. Like, we're we're putting these clothes on her body, and she's, like, not with us anymore. And then it was only a few minutes later that I turned on the news, and um, they were releasing her name. And I
Oh,
think
wow.
when that happens, when you hear it from someone else, that it's not a mistake. It's not, someone, I don't know, it just made it just really real. So for me,
Mhm.
it was probably about 2 days before I even really, I don't know, comprehended or just started the grieving process at that time, because I just was in denial that she couldn't possibly be gone.
Wow.
Yeah.
So did it take you a long time to process that after?
No, I think the funeral makes it very final. Like when there's a funeral and other people are in attendance, you know that, okay, this isn't a dream. I didn't just make this up. This is actually happening. So I think I realized and accepted it quite early. I actually put myself into therapy, not because of the trauma or even the grief, because I feel fairly equipped in life to deal with grief and even trauma, because I've had years of therapy for anxiety and for some other issues, and I'm a fairly logical person, and I've always been quite fascinated by the death process, and how one person can be there one minute and then they're not. So it's something that I kind of have dealt with in the past. But what was difficult for me and why I needed therapy is because I was so obsessed with not knowing the details. Like I needed to know, well, what was she eating before she died? What did she eat? What did she say? What was she wearing? What was she like? And of course, the police and the investigators, they can't tell you any of those things.
Yeah.
And even if they could, they're not going to tell you those minute little details. But for some reason, they were so important to me. And then I became very concerned that was I was my love of the true crime part of it, was that why I needed to know those things? Or was it really part of the grieving process? And by wanting to know all that, was I honoring Taylor, or was I being just kind of a gawker and a looky-loo about the whole thing? And so going through therapy, I learned that yes, that there is the morbid curiosity, and those details are fascinating from an entertainment perspective, but they're also important part of the grieving process, because you have to kind of know what happened, what the timeline was, and that in the end, it's okay. Like Taylor would be okay with it. It's okay. It doesn't make me a bad person. That I was interested in those tiny little details, because and that was really the biggest hurdle for me, was getting through that. And of course, once I got completely through that process, then I was able to start the podcast and learn that I can honor her by talking about other people's cases, and that it's, like I said, like that it's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you a details person, like in other aspects of your life, or was it
Well,
just
I'm an
this?
accountant.
Ah.
So yes, detail is important to me. And I think I do that too when I watch movies. When the movie's over, I always want to know, well, what did that person do the next day? And what did, like I just, yeah, I'm interested in weird, strange details about other people's lives, and especially when they die, because it's so fascinating to me that you can be there one day as a human being with thoughts and feelings and all that, and the next day it's like you don't exist anymore.
Yeah.
I just, it's such a strange, I don't even know how to explain it, but and it's always been a fascination for me, which probably doesn't help my anxiety.
Oh, that's so interesting to me. Wow.
Uh,
So what
yeah.
have you used kind of to get through those hard days, and the coping mechanisms that have helped you kind of grieve?
Well, Taylor would want, I think about what would Taylor, if she is still thinking and feeling things wherever she is, what would she be thinking and feeling and wanting? And Taylor was the type of person, she was really remarkable in this regard. If you were sad, she was sad. Like she would cry with you, and if you were happy, she was happy. Like there was no jealousy with her whatsoever. Like if you won the lottery, she would just genuinely be happy for you. She wouldn't be thinking about what was in it for her. She was that kind of person. So would she want all of us to just be constantly grieving and reliving her last moments and thinking like, oh, it's so sad that she's not here anymore, and feeling guilty if you find yourself laughing, or at the end of the day you think, well, I didn't think about her today. And she wouldn't want you to feel guilty about that. She would want you to say, no, that's good. I'm glad that you're there. So keeping who Taylor was in my mind has really helped that process, because I know for myself, like if I were gone, I wouldn't, yeah, I want people to be sad. You don't want people to be like, yay, she's dead. But you just wouldn't want that for someone. You would, and anyone that we love and care about wouldn't want it for us. So we have to just kind of, yes, we miss that person. It's sad, it's tragic. I wish, all those things that you wish you knew, but it isn't the reality. And I think that just comes back to me being an extremely logical and realistic person in all the other parts of my life. That it is what it is. So you just got to carry on and remember the good times.
Have your coping mechanisms changed over time as you have healed a little bit more?
Well, fortunately for me, because most of my issue from the time I was about 12 has been anxiety. I've had generalized anxiety to the point where I've had a lot of stomach aches, and my hair fell out a couple of times. I've had big pockets of hair fall out because of just feeling constant anxiety about little stupid things, like what if my alarm clock doesn't go off tomorrow morning, like really, really small things. And so I've had some therapy for that, and I've had all those the coping skills of the breathing through all that stuff for years and years. And fortunately, probably about 3 or 4 months before Taylor passed away, I finally spoke to my family doctor and I said, look, I am using my coping skills, but I am using them to the point where I'm exhausted. Like every day is exhausting just coping through this stupid anxiety. And she gave me a prescription for escitalopram, just a nice little low dose, started me on that, and it just took the edge off. So by the time Taylor passed away, I think I was slightly closer to normal, like on normal on a scale. So I think that helped. I think if I hadn't had that, I would have been a nightmare. But one of the things I have noticed since Taylor passed that seems to be lingering is that fear that my kids they're 24 and 21, so they're adults now. But if I don't hear from them for a certain amount of time, or I send a text and they don't text back right away, instead of thinking like, oh, they're busy, or oh, they're ignoring me, I automatically think that they've been murdered and they're laying dead in a ditch somewhere. Like my brain just automatically goes there, and it takes a little bit of like, okay, yes, we know that can happen. It probably hasn't happened here. But then I go into all the things that could happen, right? It's probably more likely a car accident or, something like that. So I still have, I'm projecting a lot of that anxiety onto the people around me, because the loss is difficult, and to have to go through it again, I just don't think that I could do it.
Wow. So your anxiety has kind of been heightened since then.
Yeah, it's changed.
Yeah.
Like before, I worried about every little tiny little stupid thing, whether there was going to be a parking spot when I needed to be, or whatever, running late, little teeny tiny things. Now my anxiety is more like murder, hurricanes, like like the really big things that can knock you out. It's not. It hasn't overtaken my life, and I'm functioning at a pretty good level. But yeah, it has changed my anxiety a little bit. Like I think I'm always going to be an anxious person, and I have just learned that I'm going to live with that. That is my little friend, and he just sits there on my shoulder and talks to me sometimes, and I just sometimes have to tell him to just, okay, I get it, stop talking.
Oh yeah, I get that too.
Yeah.
So has your anxiety over the little things kind of disappeared? or gotten
I
less
would
and
say
less?
it's definitely, I don't know about disappeared. Now it's a fleeting thought. Instead of
Oh.
intrusive thoughts, they're fleeting thoughts, right? Like, oh, I hope there's good parking. And then that's it. I don't need to think about like what route am I going to take? What am I going to do if there's not a parking? I don't have to go through the whole what if scenarios. Like I used to say I was like a Boy Scout who was prepared for everything. Like I could be prepared down to the tiniest little what if thing. And now I don't do that. And I find myself like, it'll be okay. Like, a little bit more. So yeah, it's definitely become more fleeting. And I don't know if that's just a result of years of coping,
Mhm.
years of therapy, or if it's the medication. But all I know is thank God, because there's only
Wow.
so much what if in my life I can possibly do.
Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting. So do you find it easier to live like your everyday life, not having to deal with those little anxiety issues and
Oh,
just having
yes.
these bigger problems?
It's so much less exhausting.
Yeah.
I sleep better at night. It's just really incredible. And I'm not like, the therapy was great, and like I said, it gave me those coping skills, but there are times, I think, in your life, whatever's going on, where it's it's exhausting. It's too much. If
Mhm.
I think if you find yourself using your coping skills all the time, it's time to go to the next step and just talk to your family doctor. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to take anything, especially if you've
Yeah.
had an issue before in the past with medications. And I definitely don't think medication is your first stop. I think the therapy is the much better route. But
Mhm.
I'm glad I went there.
Oh my gosh. So when you said you went to therapy pretty quickly afterwards, but more for your anxiety. Did you kind of face the trauma of losing Taylor right away as well? Or did it take you a while for the therapy to kind of address those issues?
To tell you the truth, I don't know if I ever have addressed it, because it's funny when people say, like, people will always say it doesn't matter how you lose them. You could lose your 100-year-old grandmother and people
Yeah.
will say, I'm sorry for your loss.
Yeah.
How terrible for you. And when people know, they say, oh my God, that's awful, or they don't know what to say, or those kinds of things. And I don't know. I just think, like, am I supposed to be feeling more traumatized than I am? I I
Mhm.
don't I don't know. And I don't know if it's because I feel like I've coped with it well and I've put it into a perspective, or if I maybe just avoided it, because I don't feel any more horror. Like, I had a girlfriend who passed away just before her 50th birthday. She had an epileptic seizure, um, and she choked, and that's how she died.
Oh my
Extremely
gosh.
tragic. And she left behind a son, and like, that was, like, I don't feel like losing her was very, very difficult, and so was this.
Mhm.
But I almost see hers as more traumatic to me. And I don't know if it's because I saw myself as her and saw my own mortality in her, whereas Taylor was. I don't know. I honestly don't know.
Yeah.
They, like I said, I I fear sometimes that I come across like I'm heartless about it, and I'm like, but I'm not. I'm
Yeah.
just extremely logical. There is nothing we can do about the loss of Taylor, and thinking about it and feeling traumatized by it, about how she died, doesn't help the situation. So, what can we do to help the situation? And what
Right.
Joanne has done with the Memorial Fund and helping other victims and try to get through to some people, both men and women, that look for those warning signs and get out. I think that's all we can do. So, I always find it interesting when people talk so much about trauma.
Mhm.
I don't, maybe I'm just, maybe there's something wrong with me. I don't know.
I'm really curious about that. Because I experience kind of almost lack of emotions towards other people or situations or anything like that. And I don't know if that's from my mental health issues, like the anxiety or the depression or something else. Do you experience that in other aspects of your life as well?
Maybe I feel more for other people I than I do, because I feel terrible. Like when I hear about people who have lost family members, especially through homicide, oh, that's terrible. Like I almost feel like I'm I've never heard, and sometimes they almost have to remind me that, well, you've lost someone too, and I'm like,
Mhm.
oh yeah, yeah, I guess I have, and I guess it's because my brain just doesn't want to go that deep into trauma. I think that
Yeah.
I just don't want to see it maybe for what it really is. The reason why I became so fascinated with death was, and well, actually, it's not the reason. It's just the event was my when I was 5. My Auntie Marg passed away in a car accident. She was like favorite aunt kind of thing. She wasn't an aunt, but you know what I mean, like
Mhm.
family friend aunt.
Yeah.
And my mom was one of these people that was always quite honest about things. She just spoke about things. So she said, "Well, she passed away." Well, how did she pass away? Well, there was a car accident. Well, what is a car like? How does that? Because again, I'm 5, right? Really don't know anything. And she said, "Oh, it snapped her neck." Oh, snapped her neck. You know, and I'm just like
Oh, wow.
fascinated that I'm like, you can snap your neck and it can kill you. Like, and so then they had an open casket funeral, and I wasn't allowed to go in because my mom said no, no, too traumatic or whatever.
Mhm.
And I remember every detail of that door on the church that was closed that I couldn't go through. And I remember thinking, like, what does she look like? What is what does death look like? Like, and what does
Yeah.
gone mean and all that, and just the whole, and it just became a thing. So actually when I was in high school thinking about what I wanted to do with my life, I really wanted to go through to become a forensic pathologist, to actually do autopsies and stuff like that. But it was, I mean, it's a million years of school, and I was lazy back then. So I said, well, no, I think I'll do something else. But I've always had that fascination with
Mhm.
death. And I think that then when I learned that crime and homicide was a thing, well, then that became even more of a fascination. So I guess when Taylor died, and I think that that's part of the reason why I needed to go to the therapy was because I was like, is there too much fascination here and not enough grieving? And
Yeah.
how do I combine the two of them? And then that was what really where my therapist helped me say that you can combine the two. And it's okay that you have this fascination as long as you address that you actually lost somebody here and that you need to grieve as well.
Right.
And I've reconciled in my brain that Taylor would be okay with me being fascinated by her autopsy photos. She would be okay with that. That helps. But it's interesting when you bring up trauma that I guess I just don't see it any more traumatizing than losing anybody for
Mhm.
any reason.
Yeah.
Death is traumatizing when you lose somebody, especially someone under the age of 80, it's difficult
Mhm.
and it's traumatizing. And when you watch those shows like Hoarders and that, everything's always going along fine. And then somebody in the family has died and they've suffered a loss, and then all of a sudden they become hoarders or whatever. Like, obviously, death is traumatizing to
Yeah.
people,
Yeah.
and it can trigger all kinds of mental health issues.
Mhm.
So maybe I just tend to keep myself too much on the surface of it and just say, I just don't want to. I don't know if I want to dig all deep about how it really makes me feel, and
And that's okay. That's your way of coping with it, I guess.
yeah, yeah, I guess so.
That's crazy that you bring up, I actually wanted to be a coroner when I was younger too.
Yeah,
And I wanted to go to school, forensic science, to do autopsies. That was always so interesting to me and intriguing, but
yeah,
I never ended up doing it, but yeah, I think
yeah.
that would
It is
be
a lot of years of school. My daughter is now in the beginning process. She's done 5 years of school. I think she's got 12 more to go. She says she's going to do it,
Oh,
and she's
wow.
certainly smart enough to do it. So we'll see if she actually goes all the way through. It's a tough one because there's only, I think, about 12 of them in Canada.
Wow.
So it's not. it's not like you can't just go on Indeed and get a job as a forensic pathologist.
Yeah.
So, but we'll see. We'll see what she does. But yeah, she's also fascinated in it as well, and she's very similar to me, the same way, just quite logical about it.
Mhm. So I guess
Yeah.
has your logic kind of helped you in your podcast when you're talking to all of these people about murder and death of like their own family members and stuff like that? Has that helped you kind of separate yourself from the emotional side of it?
I think so. I definitely feel a huge amount of compassion for
Yeah.
every both the victim themselves and for the families that are left behind, because I know that I mean I see it in other family members that are still really trying to process it, and that it's difficult, and the trial process and how long that is for some families, and how it doesn't turn out the way you want it for a number of families, and there's anger and all of that. So I have huge compassion, but you're right, and the logic is just kind of like, okay, well, like I recently did a story where I actually spoke to the family members, and that was much more difficult for me than the ones where I have to just research.
Mm. Mhm.
It's almost like research on paper, or you just hear audio or whatever. To actually speak to people is a little bit
Yeah.
more difficult. Like I felt like I got to know their son, who was the victim, and felt like just it's just upsetting, and it's just sad when these things happen, because it doesn't have to be like this. Like there are
Mhm.
so many other choices that a person could make other than, and I think that that was probably my biggest struggle with the whole process. It's like, why? I just don't get why somebody would do that to another human being. She had no money. She had I, what good did her death do to Dustin?
Mhm.
It didn't help him. It ruined his life. So why? Like I don't
Wow.
get it,
Yeah. Wow.
and I don't think I buy the psychosis part of it. Drugs, yes. Do I feel like if it hadn't have been for, like, if he hadn't had addiction issues, this probably wouldn't have happened?
Mhm.
Maybe, maybe not. I think he had a lot of anger in him anyways. But the psychosis part of it is like, but he took steps to try to cover it up. And when he spoke with the police, he was speaking logically, and so I don't. I'm not saying he's not prone to drug induced psychosis, and I've actually seen psychosis in action, so I know what it looks like. It is frightening, but they they don't talk in a way that's rational. Like it's
Mhm.
just easier to see.
Yeah.
Like I look at that case, the Brentwood Five, and I
Yeah.
feel like Matthew DeGrood was very ill, and he definitely at the moment didn't know what he was doing.
Mhm.
I think Dustin knew what he was doing, and I don't know why.
Yeah. So you've
So
never experienced addiction issues yourself, have you?
not myself, no,
No. But
no.
you've seen kind of your sister's struggles as
Yeah,
well?
so she started, I don't know, she just kind of went a little bit more. She had a different group of friends, but they've been about 14 or 15 her age. So I would have been, I think I was around 13 or 14 when I started to notice with her that she was just more rebellious, right? School wasn't a big
Yeah.
concern. Um, she was out with her friends a lot. The addiction part of it, I didn't really realize until I think she was a bit older that she had addiction issues. Because I remember one time she had a friend over, and they were drinking paralyzers or something, and the glass was like gross with like looked like sour milk around the sides, and they're just drinking this, and I just thought, that's a sickness. Like, can she not see what she's doing? Like, and that, I guess that's when I kind of realized, well, I think she has a bit of a problem. But then she moved. She was kind of in and out of the house a lot, and I think I just saw. Here's the thing I notice a lot about people that have addiction issues, and I don't really know how this will come across, but it seems very self-absorbed. Like the feeling is like but what about me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or it's not my fault, or if it's because of this. And I noticed that about my sister when we were growing up, right? Like if she got a bad grade in school, it wasn't her fault. It was because the teacher didn't like her, or if this happened or that happened or whatever. And so I just noticed that. And I've noticed it in a number of people that I've met that have addiction issues. I'm like, yeah, they seem very like it's like, and I don't know if that comes from being in that state, or if it's a personality type that then leads someone. Because like being self-absorbed in itself isn't such a terrible thing, because there are some people that are just more like that, and then there's other people that are more nurturing and caring about others. So, but I have noticed that. And
Mm-hmm.
I it's one of those things I've noticed. Don't say it out loud very often because I know how it comes across, but I think it's true, especially when people are in their addiction. They are very self-absorbed.
Yeah.
And I think part of treating the addiction is getting to that piece of like, there has to be a way for that person to be able to see what they are doing and how it's affecting the people around them. Because I hear so many people say like, oh, it's not like, so what if I want to party? Who does it hurt if I'm partying or whatever? But they're not able to see that, like, well, it has these ripple effects to the people around them. I don't know. Does that make any sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So has your view on drugs and addiction changed at all since Taylor's death?
Not since Taylor's death. Well, maybe it has a little bit. To tell you the truth, I'm maybe a little bit more compassionate about it
Yeah.
as an illness, because I see so many cases where addiction is an issue, whether it's victim or it's the perpetrator. In a lot of cases, it is the victim, and how hard it is to quit. And then I think back, like, I used to be a heavy smoker, and I remember how hard it is to quit, and the excuses, and well, tomorrow, I'm going to start tomorrow. I'm going to, all those things in that. So I understand that for a lot of people who have addiction issues, there is that desire to quit and to want to fix their lives and do better. And tomorrow, I'm going to do it tomorrow. And I think I have a little bit more compassion in some regard. But then on the other hand, the people that commit violent crimes while under the influence, those ones I think I'm even more angry at than I was before, because I just think it's just so unnecessary.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I got to hear from Joanne about because of her addiction struggles in the past, she kind of understood how Dustin could have done what he did and how she's kind of forgiven him for
Mm-hmm.
it. But where are you at with that? Like, how do you feel towards him?
Well, I was definitely, before I did the podcast on Taylor, I was not there. I was just mad. Just
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
what an idiot. I hate this guy. He's ruined my whole family. And how could he do this? And then so I'm glad that I did the podcast, because, I mean, our family, we definitely talk about Taylor, and we even talk about the events leading up to it and all that stuff. But
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we've really had a deep discussion about, well, how do you feel? So to ask those questions and get the answers, because both my mom and my sister are there in a place of just forgiveness, and that hearing Joanne say that she was there, and I'm like, this is her child, right? Like, if anybody has the right to be mad for the rest of her life and to never forgive, it would be her. And if she's forgiving, and my mom, I'm not surprised by my mom. She's fairly religious, and that, so I think that for her, she's like, we're all human beings, and we need to have a spirit of forgiveness. So I think that it's helped me. So moments where I'm like, okay, I get it, he's a human being, he didn't, but I think I'm just disappointed,
Yeah.
just disappointed in how he behaved, how it turned out. It's just not what I pictured for Taylor or for our family.
Mm-hmm.
So it's disappointing. But I know that I'm going to get there. I maybe not to the point where I'm willing to help him and feeling like I want to reach out to him.
Yeah.
I might never get there.
Yeah.
Although there's a piece of me that would like to sit down with him and just say, like, explain to me why. I want to know what was going through your head at that moment and find out the details from him.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I'd just be disappointed. So
yeah,
I'm not there, and I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, that's fair. I know that everyone's healing journey and recovery journey is different, but do you have kind of any advice for people who have suffered a loss and maybe don't really know where to start?
I think there's some great grief services out there, but the number one thing I think to help anybody is to think about that person when they were still here, like, and think about if you had the opportunity to sit down with that person and say, okay, you're gone, what am I supposed to do now?
Mm-hmm.
And almost like have that conversation in your head with that person. I think 9 times out of 10, if you imagine that person who they were, they're going to say, I want you to move forward. I want you to continue writing that book you were going to write, or I want you to take that vacation, and I want you to have fun and enjoy the memories of me and not be thinking that. So to me, I think that was the number one thing that helped me right from the beginning, to be able to say, even just shortly after she passed away, to have that conversation with
Mm-hmm.
her in my mind. Taylor, what do you want here? Like, what am I supposed to do here?
Yeah.
And to know that she would be like, oh, Auntie Kim, like, just, keep going, and like, no, forget about me. Nobody is ever going to say, oh, just forget about me. Pretend I never existed. But just keep going and just keep putting that foot in front of the other, and that. And maybe it's a little easier said than done for me, because Taylor wasn't an everyday part of my life. She was certainly part of my family and someone that I loved and I cared for, and I babysat for her when she was little and all those things. But she wasn't my child.
Mm-hmm.
She wasn't, because I think sometimes, like, what if it were one of my kids? And that would be a lot tougher to have that conversation with one of my kids in my head, because I would just not want to, I just wouldn't want to move forward. But that one's really tough.
Wow.
But when it's your own child, that's a pain that I just don't even want to. I don't want to go there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, I do want to touch on your own podcast as well. It's called A Million Other Choices.
Yes.
And so for everyone out there that has never heard of it, what is it all about?
Well, it is a true crime podcast. So I will talk about cases that a lot of them are local, and maybe ones that people haven't heard too much about. A lot of them are definitely Canadian. I do occasionally do some from other places. They have to have something that really resonates with me. And then I want to talk about, I definitely like to talk about the victim and who that person was, and try to make them come alive a little bit for the listener. But I want to talk about how it's affected the family since, whether that person is a marginalized person, like even somebody that was homeless, they matter to somebody. So I want to make that the important part, is of who the person was. And then we will often talk about some of the motives, like if there's a social issue with violence in schools, then I will try to research that and talk about how we can maybe do better there, and and that we just talk about murder and what we can do about it. And I really try to look at it from the victim's perspective. There's no banter. I don't have someone on that we make jokes about anything. It is just, and I try to just get to the facts. I don't really talk about my own life going on. I just say, here's the story, and then just kind of get into it. And so far, people seem to appreciate that. So.
Mm-hmm. So you started this after Taylor passed, right?
Yes. So I had been kicking around the idea of a podcast, like a podcast. I didn't even think of a topic yet for probably about a year, like after Taylor passed away, but for about a year, just, I don't know. I just like the idea of podcasting. I think it's kind of fun. And of course, I instinctively knew, oh, true crime would probably be where I would go with it because it's a topic I know a lot about. But there's so many of them out there. Everybody's done it. It's like there's a million true crime podcasts out there. And for some reason, it was just around the anniversary of her passing this past August. I just kind of woke up this one morning and said, well, so what if there's a million of them? It's not like I'm looking to get rich from it. I just really want to try it and I want to do it. I like the editing part of it. And so I'm just going to try it. And so I remembered the story of Kimmy Thompson, who passed away in 1980. I remember it from when I was a kid here in Calgary. And I thought, I'm going to start with that story. So I wrote it, researched it, did it, threw it up there thinking, yeah, maybe a couple friends of mine or something might listen to it. And it turns out there's people that it doesn't matter how many true crime podcasts there are out there, there's people listening to it. And it's kind of grown from there. And I'm really glad that I did it. And so once I got about like 6 or 7 episodes in there, I thought, people are going to start asking me to do Taylor's story because I've said, like, well, I kind of know what it's like to be a family member. And that was actually stressful because I felt a lot of pressure to not just do it, but do it right. Like, don't leave anything out. Do it in a way that really honors Taylor, doesn't upset any family members,
Yeah.
So it was tough. And so I sort of drug my feet for a little while, picking a date and thinking, oh, I don't know if I want to do it. And finally I just said, you know what? You're never going to do it if you don't just pick a date. So I just picked a date, picked Halloween because Taylor liked Halloween just the same as I do. So I'm like, yeah, just pick Halloween and put it out there. And it has really, it was healing to do it. It really helped me to just kind of get it all out of my system, right? Even the morbid curiosity stuff, get that out, just say, here's the whole story, everything that happened. Here's how everybody feels about it now. And yeah, it was good. It was a good experience. And I'm glad that I did it. So, yeah.
Okay.
But doing it was really good because it also managed to get me very briefly onto the new and notable just for a couple of weeks. Like it actually put me out there. So that's helped grow the podcast as well. So
nice. Do you have any kind of future plans or goals for it?
Well, I kind of already met my goals with it. I said I was going to give it a year, and I wanted about 20 fairly loyal listeners, maybe a couple hundred downloads or something like that. And I've kind of blown that one out of the water, which is great. So now I don't know what I want to do. I'm just going to just keep doing it and see where it goes. Like I said, I'm not looking to make money from it, so I'm not looking to. There's no point in monetizing it until it gets to a point where you could actually make a living from it, and that's a long time away. So I just figure, in the meantime, I'm just going to tell the stories and people seem to be enjoying it. And I want to have other people on. Like I do enjoy talking to people that want to tell their stories, and that just like you like talking to people that, sharing the stories. I like that part. So podcasting has actually been it's a great way to interact with people that have had similar experiences and learn new experiences from people.
Oh, that's so awesome. It's probably so much fun for you too.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you seem to really enjoy it. I've listened to a couple of your episodes, and it's interesting to hear someone else's story, especially with that honesty of just like, here's where it is. Whether you like it or not, I'm just going to say it.
Yeah, I love it. I love just connecting with people and hearing their stories and being able to relate to people at the same time,
Yeah,
with what I've been through too. That's been so much fun.
yeah,
So,
yeah. I do like people who are really honest. I remember when my kids were really, really tiny, and I went to this like a play group kind of thing. It was like it was almost like group therapy for parents at that time, because you had the parent group and then the kids would play.
yeah.
You know what I mean? And in this parent group, of course, we sat around and we talked about different parenting issues. And there was the parents that talk about the ear infection or whatever. But the people that I connected with were the ones that would say, there are days when I just hate my child. Those ones that were just totally raw, honest.
Yeah.
And I thought, these are my people. Like that, because I like that. I like people that just say, this is just what I'm feeling. And I'm sorry that I'm feeling it. And if it upsets you that I feel it, but I feel it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think it's difficult. We spend so much time in society just trying not to upset people.
Yes.
That sometimes you just want to, say what you're really thinking, what you're really feeling.
Oh, I completely agree.
Yeah. So this is a nice place to be able to do that, to say,
Yeah. Oh, good. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, I have 2 questions for you that I ask most people that come on the podcast. Just to finish off, so the first one is, looking back over your journey, is there any advice that you would give your younger self, or any advice that you wish you would have received when you were younger?
That is a loaded question. I wish I'd have learned the value of exercise and a good diet back when I was really young. That's definitely one thing that I've learned, is eat your vegetables. Looking back, and move your body. And I guess the reason why I say that is because I I see my mom now. My mom did. She's done yoga and she walks. She's 80 years old, still doing her yoga. She does it sitting down now, but she's still doing it. And I think she does that because she always did. And so it scares me now to think, at 50, in 30 years, what is 50 years of not doing all that stuff going to do? I don't want to be one of those little old ladies that's stooped over walking across the street really slowly. So I'm starting to learn that, geez, if I'd have just incorporated yoga. So that's my lesson. Do yoga. Start young, do yoga.
I like it. Okay, my last question for you is there a stigma or a misconception surrounding mental health that bothers you the most, or that you hear most often but isn't true?
Yeah, I think that, well, there's a lot of it that bugs me. The schizophrenia one bothers me, that people with schizophrenia are dangerous and violent.
Mm-hmm.
I do not believe that they are. I think that they can be, if they mix either it being unaddressed or they mix substance abuse with it, which is, unfortunately, I think it's tempting for people that are going through that, when the side effects from the medications have all these terrible after effects, where, hey, if I just, do a little coke, it's not so bad. So I get that. I see that it's very tempting, but to just class people, oh, schizophrenia, that just automatically means you're a violent criminal and that you need to be avoided. That one bothers me. And there's just a lot. I have a lot of problems with the whole mental health system here in Alberta.
Mm-hmm.
It is just only deal with things when it's an absolute crisis, and then spit them back out as soon as it's not a crisis anymore. Give them a few pamphlets and send them on their way. That doesn't help anybody, and everything always comes back to money. That it's too expensive to do that, or we don't have the funding in that. And what is it? The statistic is 1 in 5 children or something needs mental health services, and only 1 in probably 100 gets it. It's ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
it needs to be taught in schools or something, that to look for the signs, or
Absolutely.
addressed. It is such a preventative measure. If you could just address mental health right from a very, very early age and do it properly, not just like, well, we can give you this program for a few months or just for kindergarten, and then that funding drops off, and now you have to go into this. It is, and they make it so difficult to navigate for parents and for adults, and then of course that cusp period between teenagers that become adults, that's awful in there too. Like, it's, don't get me started on the mental health system here in Alberta. It's been
I know.
very, very challenging for me.
I completely agree. It's so difficult. Okay, well, that is all the questions that I had for you. Was there anything else that you wanted to bring up that we didn't touch on?
I don't know. I don't think so. It's funny. I had sort of had in my mind of how the conversation would go, and then now I feel different about it. Like, I feel like, I guess I'm having anxiety because I'm thinking, like, are people going to think I'm a terrible person because I'm not traumatized, or haven't been able to articulate being traumatized enough? Do you know what I mean?
So. Yes, I totally understand what you're saying. But at the same time, everyone experiences it differently, and everyone goes through that grieving process or the coping process differently. And this is just your way of handling it and your way of dealing with it. And if that's different than somebody else, then that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I just worry because I've put myself out there now, right?
Yes.
As a person who's had a family member be a victim of a homicide, and then you do a whole podcast that's basically hinged on that this is my different perspective because, most podcasters haven't been there. I've been there. I understand how you feel, but then to talk to you and then say, well, I feel okay. Right? And so, I don't know. To me, that sounds strange. That how can I be okay? Like, I feel almost like, am I not supposed to be okay?
But you weren't.
Is it okay that I'm okay?
You weren't always okay.
No, that's true.
So,
I wasn't always, and I definitely had my moments, and I still do. I still occasionally have those very private moments where you get a little choked up, right? You see something that like reminds you of Taylor, and then it brings it all back, and those, you get a little teary about it. I don't go back to the like worst day of my life kind of part of it, but I still have those moments. So okay, I feel better now. I feel like it's okay. It's okay to be okay.
Absolutely. So if people have more questions for you or want to reach out to you, are you open to that?
Yes, absolutely. They can email me at amillionotherchoices@outlook.com.
Okay.
And I'm also on Instagram and Facebook as well.
Thank you so much for tuning in today. Feel free to reach out at any time. You can contact me on Instagram and Facebook at Stomp the Stigma YYC, and you can email me at stompthestigmayyc@gmail.com. If you like the podcast, please like and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or Apple Podcasts. And if you or someone you know would like to come on, I would love to have you. Share your story, speak your truth, and together we can stomp the stigma.